This is our Communion Sunday this month, and normally we have someone share their testimony. So let us welcome this morning our media man, Rob Hicks. And somehow he's going to pull off doing that and this at the same time, but somehow, some way, I know Rob can pull it off. Thank you, Rob.
All right. So I was supposed to do this 3 months ago. So in each month that I was supposed to do it, I had something different that I wanted to share. So we'll see how this version goes. Not that you can compare it to the first or the second. But I was actually kind of looking forward today because I was like, oh, well, hardly anybody's going to be here. And of course, it's full house. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Rob Hicks, and I started coming to New Heritage May or June of last year, or this year, last year, June. And so I'll share with you how I ended up stumbling on to New Heritage. A lot of it had to do with your marketing campaign. TV commercials and, you know. Right. So the message I have for today, beyond my testimony, is kind of called being present in the diversity of the church. I'm a huge fan of John MacArthur and Voddie Baucham. Those are kind of my titans in terms of who I listen to on a regular basis. So I've been, kind of a milquetoast Christian, I guess, all my life. I've been a Christian since I can remember. I mean, my mom was a brand new Christian when she had me, but I always kind of remember being in the presence or having the presence of Jesus on me. So, I see so many of these people's testimonies and they're fantastic, heroic. It's the hero's journey of I was on drugs or I was doing this and, in the middle of the night, I was just getting ready to die and Jesus came in my life. Mine's the opposite of that. As it is for many Christians, I guess. So, for most of my life, though, I've been what I would consider to be a receiver rather than a transmitter, in the sense that I receive Jesus all my life, and I've been blessed. I didn't realize this was so hard. But that's something I've kind of come to realize is that I've been a recipient of Jesus and subsequently not necessarily a transmitter. And of course, in the electronics world, you need both in terms of being a receiver and a transmitter. So I guess, I wouldn't say that my church life, I went to church with my parents when I was young by force. It wasn't something, that I looked forward to necessarily, but I've gone to church most of my young life. And then, I went to college and kind of went my own way. I still continue to be a receiver, but not necessarily a transmitter. I only realized some of the gifts God had given me, but I didn't necessarily attribute my gifts or my talents to God. They were given to me freely. I was born with them, in terms of passion. I went on for my career to do audio video, live streaming, which is kind of weird now. It's like kind of behind the scenes, but I'm in front of the camera. So, yeah, paradox. And my mom is going to be so mad that I didn't tell her. She's going to say, Mom, I love you. So I'm no excuse, other than I was shy, and I really thought today was going to be like nobody was going to be here, so so I'm like really, really nervous, so bear with me. So in that theme of receiving God's gifts, in graduating from college, I stopped going to church, never questioned my belief in God. I just kind of took for granted the gifts that I was given and pursued what I wanted to with his gifts. And I didn't really realize that until recently, that in each of us, God gives unique gifts. And the modern church and culture attributes this to physical things in terms of gifts. The color of our eyes, the color of our skin, where we were born. And that's not what God means by diversity. Because I think the interesting thing with the church is that we fall, I think, too often into the world of culture. And we, well, getting a little bit ahead of myself. And I feel fine. I'm overwhelmed. Because it's like some things but you don't really face them until you're speaking them out loud, and then it hits you. I actually noticed that, Lynn, when you were doing your testimony, and I could see that in you, and I didn't catch it at the time for myself. Now I understand. But it's good. It's good. I mean, you have to face your fears and speak out loud. So, like I mentioned, in most of my adulthood, I kind of veered away from the church, lived my own life, pursued, like I said, I loved audio, video, and commercial AV, and so I pursued that, and I saw fame and careers and money in live stream production. And what was interesting is that while it failed for me personally, my intuition actually was correct, because when I started live streaming in 2014-15 and trying to tell the world, hey, you got to get involved in this YouTube Live and take your message online to the people. And it kind of fell on deaf ears, like nobody listened to my enthusiasm. And then, enter coronavirus, and, it changes overnight. So kudos to Zoom. So in that kind of personal failure, and again, it kind of goes back to not recognizing my gift, or maybe recognizing it but not using it properly for God's glory. What kind of got me on the path was actually, oddly enough, in 2014, when I stumbled on Bitcoin of all things, which is kind of totally random and has nothing to do with the Bible, but it changed my thinking in the sense that it wasn't until, that old saying, I was yesterday years old when I learned this, meaning that like you've gone your entire life and you didn't know an obvious fact. So, it was like when I was going through the Bitcoin process, I realized that, wait a second, the United States dollar isn't actually a government thing, it's a private bank. And it's like, wow. And in fact, it's only worth something because we believe it. It's fiat. It doesn't have any inherent value. We're not tied to the gold system anymore. But in any event, this isn't about that. The point is that I'd gone into my 40s before I realized a basic truth that was like, well, I didn't know that. So in any event, through this pursuit of, learning about money, what it is, what it isn't, it got me kind of hooked on the concept of finding truth. Because it's like, wait a second, that's a big deception. Like, the money that I use every day isn't actually, it's only worth something because people tell me it is, but it's not necessarily truthful. So on that theme of truth, I kind of got fixated on truth and pursuing it, and recognizing how much I don't know. It's kind of the humility side of life. So in any event, fast forward, let's say to 2019, at the beginning of COVID, I began, for no particular reason, just heavily dosing myself with John MacArthur and Voddie Baucham. And every day I was just listening to them and focusing, not necessarily intentionally, but I was focusing on the word, and I got engaged with it. And without knowing it, I became present. And that's going to, it's funny how things just tie together, because it's, in retrospect, of recent, I've been telling this to my son who works with me. And he's your typical Gen Z. He's always in his phone when he's not busy, and I love him to death. But I always tell him, when we're working together and he doesn't have anything to do and he's watching TikTok videos, is Jordan, be present. Position yourself where you're paying attention. Even if you're sitting idle, be present. And it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's like, well, I'm not doing anything, so I'll just do this. But being present is ridiculously important because it puts you in a ready position. And you have to be in that ready position before God can use you. So, yeah, so I guess it's recognizing that you have to be present and you have to be training yourself and focusing on the things that are healthy in a biblical life. So, starting for COVID, which is kind of where things in my life kind of got really started. I started doing live streaming. Churches came to me. They had that epiphany that I had been talking about for years. And they're like, hey, we want to, our churches are closed. We want to start broadcasting the Sunday services. So I got a contract with the United States Air Force at JBAB, Joint Base Anacostia Bowling, to live stream their Sunday services. And so that's kind of where I learned the craft, let's say, of being able to do live streaming for churches. But I can honestly tell you, though, that, at the time, financially, I was probably doing it more because it felt good to say that I was doing it for the church. But the reality is that I was doing it because I needed the money. Our day job of installing AV equipment in commercial and federal spaces had all dried up because all the buildings were closed, and so we had nothing to do. So I started doing the JBAB, thinking that, again, I would be able to use the gifts that God gave me, but use them for my advantage, to make money and to get contracts and to grow it. And so the lesson learned is that I got neither of those. I didn't get any contracts, and then ultimately they ended up not paying a substantial amount of it. But it was a good lesson to learn because, again, it's that concept that God gave me the gift, and I chose to use it differently, or maybe instead of what he would also like me to use it for. He gives us these gifts of art and speech, and we can use them for non-biblical things, but if we're not using them for his word, or we're keeping ourselves present for him to use us, then we're failing God. So in any event, so after I'd kind of finished doing the JBAB stuff, my business attorney, his name's Gary Silverman, I was trying to get him to do live streaming to promote his business, and subsequently he introduced me to his Jewish synagogue, which was B'nai Tzedek in Potomac, and they equally wanted to be able to start doing live stream services, but most particularly they wanted to live stream their high holidays, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So that was kind of where I really, for the first time in my life, got introduced to Judaism on a deeper level. I mean, I'd never been to a bar mitzvah or any type of Jewish ceremony before. This is where it kind of gets into how I ended up coming here. But it was through participating in some of the Jewish services and the planning for us to start live streaming their services that I was introduced to things that, again, like I was yesterday years old and I didn't know it. The big thing was the Torah scrolls. Like, I've seen Torahs, and intellectually I knew about them. I mean, I've always had a Bible, so I knew that the Bible existed. But it really wasn't until I was at B'nai Tzedek and saw the reverence of their Torah scrolls, like we have here. But the real deal ones are the ones that they have at synagogue are big, and they're actually written by a human hand. And it can take upwards of a year to literally write out the first 5 books of the Bible. And no mistakes. I mean, they're checked, 5 times? There's some process involved with making sure that every single Torah copy is a perfect replica, no mistakes. And if there is a mistake, it has to be cut out and redone. But I was blown away with that concept. Like, who thinks of the Bible as being handwritten? But the reality is that the Bible has actually been handwritten longer than it's been in print. That blows my mind. So as amazed as I was with the handwritten concept, I was like, what if I try this myself? So going through the B'nai Tzedek services and working with them, I started just handwriting the Bible myself. Nothing fancy, but I did bring kind of an example or a copy. This one's Exodus. But I just started handwriting, and I would do roughly a chapter a day. And what an amazing process. It's not something you think about, but again, one of the things that I now see in retrospect is that concept of being present. I didn't know what I was doing, and I can't say that handwriting the Bible is something valuable in terms of memorization, but it's again that concept of just being present, putting yourself in a ready position. So to date, I've done Genesis, Exodus, all of the Gospels, and I hope to be done in the next year and a half. I mean, it's not something I've been doing, regularly all the time like I originally did, but at some point I do want to be able to write the entire Bible and then give that to my kids, because how cool is that to be able to say, hey, here's a handwritten Bible. So we say but I also think it would be something very cool for New Heritage to collectively all of us do. It's and how easy would it be? You have your annual yearbooks, 66 books times all of us, easy peasy. We could easily handwrite a Bible every year, right? And have our own Torah scroll. I'm going to sign up for the English version. So, interestingly enough, one of the other folks that I've been paying a lot of attention to in the last couple of years beyond John MacArthur and Voddie Baucham is Jordan Peterson, who we've mentioned a number of times. And for my birthday this year, my wife got me tickets to see Jordan Peterson tomorrow night in Norfolk. Yeah. So I'm super, super excited about that. And one of the things I was thinking about even this morning is I know that last year he was planning to do a lecture series in Cambridge or Oxford, and he got disinvited. So you mentioned political correctness, and so that went through. He got disinvited from Oxford, but what he had planned to do was to do a series on Exodus. And for those of you that are familiar with Jordan Peterson, I highly recommend you watch his Genesis series. That is just unbelievably well done. It's amazing to see somebody like Jordan Peterson, who's not a believer necessarily, but what's amazing about Jordan Peterson is he exemplifies being present. He's not overtly, somebody like Jordan Peterson is an intellectual, and he needs, in his mind, he thinks, to be able to prove it. And so my mom and I kind of argue, because she and I love watching Jordan Peterson, and we'll watch his lectures, and then we'll argue and talk about him. And I know that a lot of Christians are praying for him. And as am I. But I would say that Jordan Peterson probably has done more to share God's word than any Christian. He's doing more in terms of sharing God's word because he's not a believer. But he's pursuing Christ without knowing it. And again, he's present. He doesn't believe in the Bible, but he's exploring Genesis. He's giving it a shot. He's exploring Exodus. So in any event, he's planning to go to Oxford this fall to do the Exodus series finally. So one of the things I was thinking about this morning is maybe what I'll do is just bring this version of Exodus with me, and if I see him tomorrow, I'll just give it to him. So we'll see. So I think to try to make this cohesive and tie all this together is, I was listening again to to John MacArthur this past week in preparation for this, and he was talking about the strength and diversity of the church, and that we get tripped up by culture too often and by our own understanding of the world. And what John MacArthur's point was is that culturally, we buy into, like I'd said earlier, into the concepts and constructions of diversity and inclusion. But John MacArthur points out that it's not diversity the way the world sees it. It's the diversity of the gifts that God have given us, in the sense that each one of us was created by God. He created us, thus we're the creation. And so it's not for us as creation to decide whether God made a mistake or whether I'm, male, but I feel like I'm female. I'm the creation. So who am I to judge, right? So as it relates to our church body, diversity is not about artificial things. It's not about color and culture. It's about assembling the diversity of our gifts. While you may see me as a color, my talent, my contribution, let's say, to the church is in doing AV. So it's not that I'm that I'm male or that I'm married or any of these things. It's just that's a gift that God gave me, and it's a gift that God gave you for teaching, and it's a gift that God gave you for ministering. So I think that's what we need to understand in terms of building this church and all churches is, sure, we need diversity, but we need the diversity of the gifts that God gave us, not the gifts that the world tells us we need. We don't need diversity of sin. we need the individual diversities that each and every one of us hold. And I think, I guess an easy way to kind of see this is I'm sure because of COVID, all of you have gone through dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of Zoom calls. And, one of the things that you'll realize, you could try this as an exercise, is I always tell people when they're in Zoom calls to collectively, when you're on camera, show the bottom of your rib cage to an inch above your head and center your nose. And which may sound silly, but oftentimes if you're on an everyday Zoom call, some people have the camera pointed up in the air and you're looking at the ceiling fan, so you only see maybe this much of their head. But each frame is a puzzle. And so when you're watching it on a Zoom call and it's in Hollywood squares, some people look great, some people look awful. And when you composite them all together, because of the people that are awful, it makes everything awful. So, what I found is that when I've done Zoom calls where it's in Hollywood squares and everybody's properly framed, everything looks amazing. It's one beautiful picture. But in order to pull it off, it requires that each and every one of those individuals that's in front of their camera bothers to properly frame themselves because they're, in some ways, gifting it to others. And that was kind of what John MacArthur was talking about in terms of our gifts. That God gives us these gifts, yes, for us to be able to use, let's say, in the world. But more importantly, he gives us these gifts because he wants to be able to use them. But if we're not present and paying attention, we can't use those gifts. We can go to church, but if we're not in church and making ourselves present and in a standby position, we're not building the church. We're not a part of the church. And that kind of goes to that transmitter-receiver thing, right? Is many people, myself included for the majority of my life, was a receiver of Bible. I was a receiver of church. I went there because I felt obligated to. So it's like, I'll show up, I'll do my obligation, I'll spend my hour and a half on a Sunday, give my tithe, see you later, see you next Sunday. And that's receiving the church, but it's not transmitting back to the church. And I think that's what God expects of his church. Sure, it needs the pastors like yourself, but it equally needs all of us collectively to be present and to be present with the talents and gifts that God gave us. And that's what I hope for this church body. It's so exciting to see so many people here today. I haven't seen this many people. Yeah. Well, it's terrifying, but incredibly amazing, because I see that if we look around the room, you know, and amass the individual talents that compose us, think of what we could do. You know, we talked about handwriting the Bible. Maybe that's something that's tangible that will kind of prove to you guys, you know, that a small church can do big things. But, you know, I would hope that, you know, I really hope that we grow this church. I love being a part of this church. And yeah. So, yeah, so I think in closing, it's about being present, being here, being here for our church, and giving of the diversity of our gifts to this church. You know, transmitting God's word to your neighbor, correcting them when they're wrong. You know, we live in a world of the world that calls diversity, with the presupposition that evolution is real, when as Christians we know that that's not true. You know, that God created everything, and He created one man and one woman. So here's to being present and being a diverse collective of our talents and gifts from God.